Welcome to the J. Scott Outdoors podcast. Today we have my friend James Dudley of James Dudley Guided Hunts on the line. James, how you doing?
I'm good, Jay. How are you?
Oh, pretty good. Since we last talked, I think you had a baby.
Yeah, I did. Exactly 3 months ago. So he's doing great. His name's Clayton Bear Dudley, and he's a little tank. He's a giant little baby, but he's a really happy baby too. He's nonstop smiling and laughing. That's like his thing, is smiling and laughing. So I got lucky.
Well, that's good. Yeah, that's good. So I got to ask, did he come out of the womb with a Coues deer rack in his hand?
No, he did not.
He would have wanted to if he had a choice.
Yeah, I've already got some pictures of him holding some antlers, but
good for you.
Yeah, he's doing really well.
Good for you. The last time we talked, we talked, I believe, about 6A and 21 deer, which we'll cover today. We also have had some podcasts about you guys finding that big bull up there, up in the 7s units, and tracking that sucker down and getting him killed. Beautiful bull on the late hunt. I don't think we've talked to recap how your elk season went last year. I know you had come off a 2016 elk season. That was a fantastic season for you guys. How was your 2017 elk season in Arizona?
It was fun, I'll put it that way, but it was frustrating being somebody who takes pride in knowing what animals are supposed to do. But
they threw you for a loop. Did
yeah, they did. For a loop? They did. I'm just hard on myself, but we had a good season. My hunting partner killed a good bull up in 8 in the early archery bull tag, and we put a ton of time and effort scouting that unit all summer and running a bunch of cameras and glassing bulls, videoing bulls, and had everything ready, set, and thought we were going to have a bunch of big bulls around. And of course, big bulls do what they do, and they decided to go disappearing on us, prior to the hunt, a couple days and weeks before the hunt. And it just turned into a tougher hunt than we were kind of expecting. Last year, that moon phase was full moon, like midway through the hunt, and the bulls were out all night long. Every night we could hear bulls just going crazy all night, and then as soon as before that sun would come up, they would all shut up and head for the pine trees, it seemed like. And so we got kind of stuck playing around in the pine trees. And also last year in Arizona, that wind on the early archery bull tag, it was really windy, which we're not really used to that time of year, but it just made for a tough hunt.
Yeah,
we still had a good time and got a good bull killed.
One thing to point out, the listeners out there, when you talk about, scouting all summer, taking video, getting great trail camera pictures of velvet bulls, we've talked about it on the podcast before. Was it one of those things that you had so much consistency with some of the bulls that you just figured that they would stay right there, or was it always in the back of your mind that you were nervous that they were going to leave and the pattern that you had noticed and witnessed all summer was going to change? Or did you truly feel like those bulls were going to stay right there in the immediate area?
The whole time running cameras, you kind of know that they're going to move. They're going to leave. Maybe one or two will stick around in the area that you've been seeing them all summer. But last year, literally every big bull we had on camera didn't necessarily disappear, but they went a long ways. a couple of them, I'm sure, went up to Unit 10. I'm positive that they went that way because we could see progression on a couple different trail cameras and starting south and heading north in a couple days, and then they're gone for good. So you kind of know what happened to those bulls. A couple bulls did stick around, but you just kind of know that you're putting all this work in, but you know that they're going to move, but you just want to be able to hopefully find them and that they stay in your unit.
Yeah, for sure. I mean, there's all sorts of cases out there where bulls, are in 9 all summer and they end up down in 7 West, or they end up in 7 East, or they end up in Unit 10, or, bulls in 8 end up in 10, or they end up across the road and going to the west, or, it doesn't really matter where you're at. It seems like those elk are constantly, getting ready to move and on the move. And the same thing, though, bulls are moving into the unit as well, but it's a little bit hard when you kind of try to establish a pattern and then they change that. From a bugling standpoint, in Unit 8, I hear you talk about a lot of bugling at night in the tent, listening to them bugle. How was your daylight hours bugling throughout that early season?
Most of the hunt, the daylight hours, they weren't too vocal. It wasn't horrible or anything, but you'd like to hear them a little bit more than we did. But yeah, at night, middle of the night, every single night, just they're all over the place. And there's a little bit of private property up there, and of course that's kind of where they like to hang out and play all night and then disappear into the pine trees after that. So for sure. That's kind of how that went. You talk about the pine trees. A lot of our units in Arizona, we've got pinyon juniper and some of the lower transitional type country that's really the elk really like. Some of the oak and some of that different timber. But then a lot of our units have ponderosa pine thickets, and you talk about those bulls, going to the pines. From a listener out there that maybe is not, totally familiar with Arizona elk hunting or their patterns and what have you, what are the challenges when elk get in the ponderosa pines for you as someone that likes to hunt bulls, predictable bulls and what have you? When they get in the pines, what challenges does that bring? Okay, I'll tell a little story about that last year's hunt and kind of go into the pine trees. But opening morning last year, we had a big 7x7 bull located. He had about 10 cows with him, and he was down in the junipers. And we watched him until it got dark the night before the hunt. So the opening morning, we were the only ones on that bull, and we snuck out in the dark, knew about where they were going to be, and got right up close to them before the sun came up, and we were playing the wind the whole time, and we were in there for over an hour with all the elk just kind of hanging out waiting for that big bull. And we could see cows running past, we could see little bulls running past, and we never got a clean shot at that big bull, but we were able to stay in there with them for over an hour until finally it seemed like the lead cow spotted us, and then they all ended up blowing out of there and took off. But so we were able to hang with them for a long time. Up in the pine trees, it's really hard to get that close because they can see you from a long ways away, as opposed to like the junipers or cedars. It's more flat, and their view is blocked almost until they're in shooting range. But in the pine trees, with the terrain, they can be a couple hundred yards away on the other side of a canyon, or down in a canyon, or up on a hill, down on a hill, and they're smart enough to know that they're not coming to most calls, and they're not gonna come check out anything unless they can see the elk. So they can see people, and that seems like that's where all the people ended up also, up in the pine trees. Does that make sense?
James, wouldn't you agree though, for those people listening outside of Arizona, a lot of our ponderosa pine forests, the Forest Service has gone in and done quite a bit of thinning, and so what you have is basically your ponderosa pine, but there's not a lot of smaller brush or vegetation. And so in other words, in a lot of that ponderosa pine, those thickets, you can see a couple hundred yards in most directions. And so those elk, what I've noticed is they use that to their advantage. And when you say they're not going to come unless they see an elk, well, you know, in most situations, an elk will come until they, you know, can use their eyes to see. You know, and Chris Rowe talks about, you know, see you first, hear you second, smell you third. Mm-hmm. But would you agree that when you get in those situations, you know, Unit 8, you know, has a ton of that. Unit 3C has a ton of that. Some in Unit 1, you know, some of those units, 6A has a bunch of that where, you know, they can see for 200 or 300 yards in a lot of situations, and so it makes it very difficult to get close to them before you can actually start calling, whereas in the junipers, most junipers, you know, are, say, from one juniper to another, and they're bushier, you know, they're 15 yards apart, and so you can kind of just zigzag through the junipers, and the visibility is very, very minimal, and so it allows you to get a lot closer to those bulls. And I think that would be a tip for anybody out there hunting coming up in September is, you know, definitely if you've got elk in the pinyon junipers, in the cedars as James calls them, a lot of times you can get much closer to those elk and have a lot better opportunity to shoot them with a bow because of the, you know, their lack of being able to see long distances. But then they move into those pines, I think, because they can see. They still have cover for some shade and bedding down and what have you, but I almost think they use that ability to see as a mechanism to, you know, for safety. And then, you know, you get a bunch of hunters charging around in the ponderosa pines, you know, it becomes a bit of a circus for sure.
Yeah, it seemed like it took the elk about 1 day, 2 days to figure out that there was a bunch of people running around in the area where they haven't been, making noise, blowing calls and stuff. And so then after they realize that, they're smart enough to know that they're, well, not all the time, but they're smart enough sometimes to know that they want to see something before they go check it out. And they'll just bugle. You can keep a bull bugling for a long time, a couple hundred yards away, and sometimes they'll just sit there and bugle, 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 and try and send your hunter over there and do that stuff. But yeah, they definitely can use their sight a lot better in the pine trees.
We're going to talk about deer on this episode, but before we do that, you've had some good success on late hunts and kind of pinpointing and figuring out bulls. I'm curious if last season, did you have any guided late hunts that you know, you were excited about, or did you do any at all? I'm curious. I was asking about the late hunts. Normally on the late hunts, you have some hunters and you're able to pinpoint some bulls like that big bull you did in 2016. Did you have some late hunts this year? Late elk hunts this last year?
Yeah, we did. We had a couple brothers that we guided, and we had a good time out there too. We went back up in the 7s again. Actually, that's where we're going to be this year too. And yeah, so let's see, that hunt, that was a good hunt too. This past year I had the same type of thing. A couple bulls located the night before the opener, 2 shooter bulls and then 1 kind of raghorn. And so I just stayed up until it got dark videoing them. And I was the only person around on the glassing hill, nobody underneath me, anything. And so I was like, all right, it's going to be perfect. Went back to camp, showed the hunters the bulls, and decided that's where we were going to start. And then next morning we get out there, and we're early, like, I don't know, maybe an hour before the sun's coming up. And we park the truck and start walking, and somebody had already got in front of us and parked close, and I knew they didn't know that those bulls were there. So I was like, I don't even know where these people are. Let's just go up on this glassing hill and wait for the sun to come up. So we get halfway up on our glassing hill, and I see like 6 headlamps walking across the hill exactly where the bulls were hanging out the night before. And they ended up walking exactly, like, to the exact tree that I was videoing all these bulls the night before. And they obviously had no idea that they were there. And who knows where the bulls ended up after that. I mean, I found them like a day or two later, but they ended up bumping them in the dark. And I don't know where the hunters were headed, but they ended up walking right through these bulls. And so that's how that hunt kind of started.
Did those bulls end up coming back to their home spot, or did they get blown out for good?
Yeah, so they ended up in the same area basically. They moved, a mile and a half. But another funny thing about that is the next day on the same hill, I'm like, well, maybe those bulls will be back on that hill. So we start at a different spot, but we had the big glass so we could look at that hill to check and see if those bulls ended up over there. And the raghorn ended up over there. And the same guys that hiked across there in the dark the day before parked a little ways away, and they were gone from their truck out hiking around. And that bull, as soon as he saw the sun coming up, he took off running and headed for the shade, and ended up running right to their truck, like within 50 yards of their truck. And we were just waiting the whole time. We're like, gosh, that thing is any second now, somebody's going to shoot that bull. And nobody ended up shooting it. So those guys didn't know it, but they were really close to bulls that whole time.
Oh, man. It's funny how that works out sometimes, man.
Right. Yeah.
Talking about deer coming up, we've got the deadline, I believe, June 12th for the sheep and the deer in Arizona and the buffalo. I know you're a Coues deer nut. Shot that big giant buck a couple years ago with your bow. You routinely guide guys on those archery and on the rifle hunts. First and foremost, we talk about conditions a lot on this podcast. I know you are out there quite a bit scouting. I know you're running a bunch of trail cameras and constantly out in the woods. What are you seeing out there in the units that you like to hunt? Obviously it's dry, but give a little bit further explanation of what you're seeing.
All right, so a lot of the tanks are dry right now.
The dirt tanks?
Yeah, the push dirt tanks. They dried. A lot of them dried up within the past month, and they're more than I thought actually would be dry. But that being said, in the desert there is still water. I'm not going to say everywhere, but every little cut and canyon collects water. Sometimes they dry up, sometimes they flow year-round, sometimes they'll have one big, huge pool that nobody knows about, and so all the animals know where to go to get water. Just because a few tanks dry up, all that means is the cattle probably aren't in there. It doesn't mean the deer move. The elk can move, but Coues deer, they have backup water sources. They don't if they don't have to use a big push tank, they're not even going to use it anyways. They'll go find a puddle or a spring somewhere. And so, yeah, it's really dry out there. The feed's not great, but there's still plenty of water in the desert for Coues deer to survive. So I know everyone's worried about antler growth for elk and deer, but that's a different subject. Just for them to stay where they normally stay, there's plenty of water out there still.
Are you talking kind of specifically 21 and 6A when you're talking about kind of in those desert areas?
Yeah,
you're saying the dirt tanks are dry, but there's seeps and they're finding water. You're not seeing those canyon spots that have water. You're not seeing them dry up yet.
No, not yet. And I'm talking about in the past month. I'm talking about Unit 21, 20B, 19A, 6A. The springs that I know of and check, and the cuts that have running water or puddles of water, they haven't dried up yet. So we're talking Coues deer. There's still plenty of water out there for Coues deer.
Okay. With the hunt structures this year, I noticed that they've got, they obviously have like 21 mule deer tags. They've got, November 2nd through November 8th, and then they've got December 14th through the 31st. They've got a 20 tag mule deer hunt in 21, as well as 21 for Coues deer. They've got an October hunt, a November 9th through the November 15th, kind of a middle hunt, and then they've got a 30 tag, December 14th through the 31st, 30 tag, we'll call it a late December hunt. When they've moved when they've moved 21, as well as 6A, I believe, to that 3 hunt structure, October, November, and December, what have you seen as far as pressure on the deer? Do you like the change? Because I believe it is a change to have 3 hunts. I believe they just had I think it was an October hunt, no November hunt, and then, a December hunt.
Yeah.
Is it added pressure? What's your thoughts, as far as on the deer themselves? Do you think it matters, or what's your thoughts?
I like it. I like it because there's less people in the field at any specific time. So if it was like that for mule deer, I might not like it as much in those units, but for Coues deer, they're more secluded, and in the central Arizona, it's not like they're off the side of the road everywhere like some mule deer can be. So if you have, like in 21, 300 tags in a week, and then you wait a week and put another 300 tags in there, I just like that better, because there's not everybody. I think there used to be 650 tags in there on 1 week, and that was just too many. There's people everywhere just tromping around and kicking up deer.
So James, in other words, by splitting it into 2 hunts, you felt like when it was 600 and some people, that in order for people to feel like they had to get away from other people, it made them trounce around in areas maybe that you would go in that are harder to get to. But when it's only half of that, they kind of stay on it. From your perspective, what I'm reading into that is the general public on both of those hunts kind of just stay in those more easy to get to areas, where when it was 600, they were forced to go into more remote areas, into some of the pockets and stuff that you talk about deer, the Coues deer being isolated kind of in a more secluded pockets. Am I reading that right?
Yeah, I just don't think that they see as many people per year, I guess, or per fall, because everyone's not in there. Because when you have that many people in a unit like 21, where people are going to be congregated in certain spots, people are just, if you hike to a glassing spot and you look around and you see 5 other hunters, well, then you're going to keep hiking. And then same thing, you get to the next spot and you see a couple more guys, you're going to keep hiking. And so that issue, I don't think it comes up as much when there's half the amount of guys in the forest or in the desert.
Yeah. When you in talking about the later December hunts in 21 and in 6A, has it been your experience that you do see quite a bit of rutting activity as far as, bucks chasing does, bucks on the move, checking scrape lines, maybe compared to some of the southern Arizona units? I mean, seems as though the central Arizona units, the 6As, the 21s, the 22s, the 23s, it does seem like after Christmas you do get quite a bit more activity compared to maybe some of the units down south that, it's just not time yet. I'm curious your thoughts on that type of movement on those hunts, those December hunts.
So the mule deer in late December are definitely rutting. They're breeding, they're chasing does, and the Coues deer, definitely wouldn't call it rutting, but they're on their feet a lot more during the day. You can glass Coues deer up pretty much any time of day that time of year, and they'll hit water all day long that time of year. We had one tank that we were sitting, and we would have Coues deer coming into that tank all day from sun up to sundown. They would be there any time, and there was a lot of them too, and that was part of that whole drought that we're still in. We were affected by that in December even, and they all had their one spot where they were going to get water. So they're on their feet a lot more late December, but they're not rutting up there. They're not breeding.
Yeah. I noticed that 21 and 6A, they do not allow archery hunting in December, but then they both allow archery hunting the month of January. On those later rifle hunts, obviously you've got mule deer hunters to contend with, but from a pressure standpoint, it's pretty awesome, is it not?
Oh yeah. But both of those hunts, the Coues deer and the mule deer rifle hunts for 6A and 21, those are really good hunts. I don't want to give anything away, but there's some big deer in both of those units that you can find in December. Mule deer and Coues deer. It's a lot easier to find them, and they're big.
When you're talking about mule deer hunts, both of those units, December 14th to the 31st, 6A has 15 mule deer tags, and 21 has 20 tags. Just on a mule deer basis, would you rather have the 6A mule deer or the 21 mule deer?
For me, no brainer, 6A.
Is just more bucks or bigger bucks, less bucks but bigger, or more bucks, or what?
From what I see, there's bigger deer up there, and it's more hunter friendly, I guess you could say. 21 can get pretty rugged, and that time of year, you never know what you're going to get. And 6A, there's way more deer up in 6A also, but it's just not, I don't think it's as brutal. If you know how to hunt them and where to glass from and find a bunch of good glassing, then you'll be able to look over a ton of deer up in 6A.
Okay, good to know. Let's talk a little bit here on the October hunt, the November hunt, and then the December hunt from a patterning deer standpoint. If out of those 3 seasons, for you or someone that you're going to guide, if you had to pick the season that you could only get one tag, and you people would call and say, "Hey, I want to go on a guided hunt with you." Which hunt would that be and why? Which season would that be and why?
Well, for me, I would always choose the January archery deer, over-the-counter archery deer, just because both species are rutting at that time, and the way we hunt, we glass and spot and stalk, walk people in, and it's pretty easy to go out there and find some good deer, some shooter deer. The only problem is that time of year they're not exactly patternable, but they're easier to find. Patterning wise, that early archery, the August and the first week of September, Coues deer are pretty easy to pattern that time of year, in my opinion.
I missed you're saying in the early season in the velvet, like the August hunt, or are you talking about the October hunt?
August, the archery.
Oh, okay.
Velvet.
Okay. So you would pick both archery seasons over the rifle seasons, as far as patterning deer.
Well,
what about the October hunt where they've just shed their velvet? Do you find, if you know, speaking specifically about Coues deer, in their home ranges and tight, corridor and what have you that they travel, the downside from what I guess, from what I've seen over the years is October you can get really warm weather and get very little activity.
Yeah.
But how important is it that the buck's there? You don't need them to go dancing around the hillside too much. You just need to, make sure you can get on them and find them. Talk a little bit about that October season and time frame and how important it is to really pattern a buck all summer. And do you see those bucks mostly in October being, at the end of October right there?
Yeah, so they're not going far that time of year. They're in a very tight pocket that they don't hardly ever travel out of if they don't have to. And most of the time, the only issue with that time of year is, like you said, the activity level. They're not on their feet very long that time of year, or per day. They're sleeping most of the day. They're not feeding a whole bunch, and they don't need to go get water during the day if they can do it at night. So if you know where they're getting water, and if you glass them up, say you glass up a deer in September and he's just on a hillside feeding or going to get water, hanging out, there's a good chance he's going to be right there a month later in October when you have that rifle tag, or the first tag or the second tag. Doesn't matter to me. I'd take the second tag just as much as I'd take the first tag, because of how tight their circle is. They're in there. You will be able to find them if you can glass where their home range is. They're not going to go far that time of year, especially if there's water close. And even if the water's far, they're going to come right back to that spot. They'll go drink their water and come back to their home range. They get real comfortable in, a tiny little spot and just stay there. They don't like moving around. They feel unsafe.
I'm looking at the moon phase chart for October 2018, and it's full on the 24th of October, and that October hunt in 21N and 6A starts on the 26th, which is a Friday. And so pretty much that entire hunt, you'll be dealing with a real strong, heavy full moon. as opposed to November, whereas your new moon is on November 7th. Just looking at the moon phase alone, hearing you talk about, the October or the November, you'd take either one. It appears that the November hunt in 6A and 21 and across the board in all the units that we're talking about pretty much in Arizona, it seems like that November hunt with the new moon seems like you'd have quite a bit more daylight activity movement. Just curious your thoughts, just specifically this year on, the full moon kind of falling on the October and it being a new moon on the second hunt. Does that make you change your mind as to, telling people which hunt would be a better hunt?
Yeah, I actually just had that conversation with a guy from Missouri that's going to come out and hopefully draw that second tag, because you're 2 weeks later, the chance of it being cooler is higher, which if it's cooler, just in general, they're going to be on their feet more. And then you have no moon as opposed to full moon, and in general, that's going to keep them on their feet more during the day also. So for me, not to mention draw odds, the draw odds on the second hunt are way better than the draw odds on the first hunt. So if you want to actually get drawn, I would definitely put in for the second hunt as opposed to the first hunt. I think it'd be a better hunt this year. Of course, some of the big bucks are going to get killed on that first hunt, but not all of them. And if you have a couple different bucks located where people aren't going to find them, or hopefully not going to find them, they're going to be there on that second hunt. Even if somebody goes in there and bumps them, and as long as they don't kill them, they're going to be back there on that second hunt.
Yeah, good stuff. I'm also looking at the moon phase for the listeners out there on the December hunt. It's a new moon on December 7th, and it's full on December 22nd. So Coues deer hunters, pretty much this year, it's a kind of a rough patch because that hunt starts on December 14th. It's a first moon, so it would be a quarter moon on the 15th. But then that whole first week, you're hunting into a full moon with it being full on the 22nd. And then, in other words, you're going to have quite a bit of moon that whole December hunt. Here's a question for you. Is dry, it's pretty dang dry. And then you're going to be contending with the full moon on that hunt where, and guys may say, oh, Jay, he's a pessimist. He's negative. He always brings up these things. Well, I've done this long enough that I know that it matters. But, we're in the application game right now with the deadline, June 12th. I think it's something you definitely have to consider. And you definitely, I try and look at all factors, everything, in order to make a good decision. Not saying it's going to say, hey, I'm not going to apply, but definitely, it makes that November hunt look pretty darn good when you've got your October hunts full moon and the December hunts pretty much the whole time is full moon. I'm curious if your thoughts of colder temperatures and what have you would negate that moon in December.
Yeah, I think so. Colder temperatures and just to see how the drought is right then. Even this last December, like I was saying earlier, it was definitely drought. Like we were in a drought in December, and there was still Coues deer on their feet all day long. So
yeah,
that moon does play a big part, but I don't know. I would probably roll the dice. Yeah, exactly. Yeah. It might make it a harder hunt, that's for sure. But
don't you agree, James? Like, I mean, Coues deer, what we've noticed in Mexico so much is they're so thin-skinned. I mean, if we did have a week worth of a cold snap and, temperatures, got pretty cold, got cold at night, I mean, it's going to force them to be, up on their feet during the day, whether there's a, moon or no moon. And typically when there is a full moon, they're bedded for the first couple hours of light, and they're moving during midday anyway. So, I mean, one could argue with me that it actually might make for a great hunt, especially if you could get some colder temperatures. But I just wanted to point that out. And then looking ahead and forward, January 2019, the moon isn't full till the 21st of January. So I feel like for Arizona Coues deer hunters, archery hunters, most units are, over the counter, and open, for sure those first, 2-3 weeks of January. I think you're going to get some awesome movement, some awesome activity. It might just be a phenomenal year for that January Coues deer hunt.
Yeah, definitely. That's prime time for Central Arizona Coues deer, is that whole month of January, and they can be on fire starting with the beginning of the month or go all the way through the month. So, yeah, those first 3 weeks are going to be good next year for sure.
I want to take a second and thank the sponsors of this podcast. Go Hunt Insider has been with me from the beginning. They are the title sponsor of this podcast. I want to encourage everyone out there, if you're not a Go Hunt Insider member, it is the best Western hunting resource out there when it comes to draw odds in looking and breaking down these particular units in each and every one of these Western states, as well as each one of the animals. I want to encourage you to use the J. Scott promo code when you sign up, and when you do that, when you use the J. Scott, that's all one word, J. Scott, promo code, you're going to get a $50 Go Hunt Gear Shop gift card. And I'm getting direct messages on Instagram quite often from guys saying they've already spent their $50 or they put their $50 towards another purchase. Go Hunt Insider is a phenomenal resource. I encourage you guys to check it out. Make sure to use the J. Scott promo code. Also want to thank Coues.com. That's KUIU.com. Coues makes the best ultralight hunting gear on the market. It's the gear that Dar and I, the clothing, the backpacks, the gear that Dar and I wear on all our hunts. Encourage you guys to check out Coues.com. Also, PhoneScope, PhoneScope.com. Use the JScott16 promo code. You're going to get a 10% discount there with PhoneScope. And then the Outdoorsman, the Optics Authority. Give those guys a call, 1-800-291-8065. You're going to get a 10% discount when you use the J. Scott promo code. You can also go to outdoorsmans.com. Use the J. Scott, that's all one word, J. Scott promo code. You're going to get a 10% discount. James, I want to talk to you a little bit, move on a little bit from the deer. I'll give you a chance to come back with some concluding thoughts on deer, but I believe here in a couple days on the 29th, which is a Tuesday, I believe the Game and Fish is going to be talking about the trail cams. From what I understand, at the last commission meeting, there was a push to, or they were talking about potentially banning trail cameras or making, quarter mile from water hole. I've heard all sorts of different things. I'm curious your thoughts. You've been using these trail cameras as a tool for a long time. For me, my opinion, if anyone, if any of the commissioners are out there listening to this podcast, I would urge you, this is coming from someone that does not use trail cameras. I use them on my place in Colorado that's, 100% private ground where I'm not interrupting anybody's hunt, but and I don't predominantly use trail cameras. I never have. I shouldn't say I never have, but I predominantly don't use them. But I feel like it would be a bad thing, personally, for guys like yourself that are up on seeps and springs and little potholes in some of these units in central Arizona that don't interfere with anybody else's hunt. You're having fun over the summer. You're gaining intel. You're not bothering. Your cameras are not bothering anybody. Now, I've been and witnessed up on the Arizona Strip. I've witnessed in, 9 and 10, 10, 12, 14, 15, trail cameras on one, barbed wire fence, or on, 6 on one tree and 6 on the other tree. I understand that it creates issues and problems, and maybe there's something to be done in those units where maybe you let the guys run them all summer and then have a date and have all the cameras pulled. I know there's a talk about auction tags, and what about the governor's tag holder? Can they use them or not use them? And the last thing we want to do is affect the in my opinion, the dollar amount that comes in. If some guy's willing to pay $250,000 for because they have trail camera pictures of a deer, that goes back to our deer. So if now that same guy is only willing to pay $100,000, that's $150,000 less. And I know that's all speculative and what have you. So I don't envy their decision that they have to make, James. But one thing I would say is there's a lot of people across the state that are using trail cameras. They're not bothering anybody. It's not affecting any hunt or any quality of hunt. I would even argue that there are older age class bucks being shot and harvested because of the use of trail cameras, because of, the trail cameras allow us as guides, us as hunters, to know what inventory is there and hold off on maybe that 3-year-old, 3.5-year-old buck, that's a 90-incher to shoot a, 125-inch buck that's, a 6.5, 7.5-year-old deer. Talking about Coues deer, a mature deer. So that's my 2 cents. I don't want to see any action at all. If there's any action, if I had to vote no action to take place, if I was forced to take action, I would say in maybe some of the, units, the strip, maybe some of the real popular elk units, let the guys run the cameras all summer, put a date, whatever date it is, and say the cameras have to be pulled. And us as sportsmen, we've got to police ourselves. That's my opinion. Obviously, this whole rant, so to speak, has been my opinion. And other people have other opinions. James, I'm going to be curious to hear what yours is. But I just personally, I hate to see any sort of ban, any sort of restriction on cameras. Curious your thoughts.
Yeah, I agree with a lot of what you just said. I'm one person that would hate to see any more regulation just handed out to anybody, really, especially all the people that are out there doing the right thing, and not affecting anybody else's hunts or anything. I just think that the entire ban is not the way to go, obviously. I could still be just fine without running trail cameras. They're a lot of work, as any guide will tell you. To run a whole bunch of trail cameras is a ton of work. It's not easy, and it's a ton of work to run them right and to have them work right and keep up to date on all of them. And as for the strip and Kaibab, I said the same thing last year when I talked to you. We were kind of talking about the same thing. I don't guide up there. I know that they have an issue up there, and whatever happens up there, I hope that everybody's happy with it. In the other part of the state, central part of the state, I'm running into some issues with people running trail cameras during the hunts. That's like the new thing last year was I would have trail cameras out on water, salt, springs, trick tanks, game and fish tanks for, a couple months, and I would be the only camera there, or another outfitter camera. You could tell that another outfitter's got a camera there, and then it would come time for the hunt, and literally the night before the hunt, people would go set their trail cameras on the water sources. And I would be going and pulling cards before the hunt and see 5 or 6 cameras during the hunt. they're checking those cameras, and then after the hunt, when I go pull all my stuff down, they're gone. So I'm not opposed to maybe a season for, I hate saying everybody, but if that's what it's going to take, then
you'd rather see a season than a complete ban, right? You'd rather see a season of trail cameras than a complete ban.
That's what I'm trying to say. If they want to get rid of them during hunting season, then I'll abide by the rules, I guess. But to outlaw them all together would just be, that sounds like a big, huge problem that no one's going to be able to enforce, and it just doesn't seem fair for 90% of the people that are doing everything the right way.
Yeah, I mean, an all-out ban, the challenge I see with an all-out ban is there's still going to be people that are going to use them. And, the guys that play fair are not going to use them, and they're going to be at a disadvantage. The guys that are willing to push the envelope and use them anyway, they're obviously going to get intel and information that others aren't, and they're not playing by the rules. It's going to happen. If there is a quote-unquote season of some sort, I think we should be allowed to somewhat police ourselves. And, whatever the date may be, if this is what they come up with, whatever the date may be, August 1st or whatever date it may be, August 15th or, who knows, that if a sportsman comes across a camera, that they're allowed to pull the camera, turn it into the Game and Fish, let them auction that camera off to the highest bidder and let the money go, to the Game and Fish department or go to wildlife habitat or go to something like that. I mean, and you say, well, geez, you don't want people pulling your camera. Well, listen, if it's a season and your camera's found out of season, then it should be pulled. That's kind of the way I look at it. And, it's so unfortunate that we've gotten to where we're at, but the reality is we have gotten here. And, I just hate to see them do an all-out ban. I hate to see them do you got to be a quarter mile from a water source. I don't think that's going to improve or help anything. And if anything, that might make things worse.
Yeah.
So I'll be curious to see what they do and what shakes out from it. Like I said, I like to glass them up. I've never been a real big trail camera guy. Definitely on public land, I haven't been a big trail camera guy. But, I hate to see guys that really enjoy running them all summer, and even in the off season, after Coues deer season, say February, March, April, before the antlers drop. I mean, you can learn so much with those cameras. I just don't really see that, bothering anything. But, maybe during the season of any season, big game hunting season, maybe that's the solution. Just make sure that, no cameras during the hunting season. That might be fairly simple. It might be easier said than done. Who knows? But any concluding thoughts from you, James, on anything that we've talked about or any new subjects?
Back to the trail camera thing for 1 second. So, as I understand it, Game and Fish is having a meeting Tuesday night, and they are streaming that meeting live. Is that correct?
I don't know that specifically, but that's what I've heard. They're going to have some sort of webcast. I would love to get a copy of the audio of that and play that audio. I'll see if I can do that if people aren't able. But I believe you can also go on their website and see a recorded copy of the webcast. But I'll check into that.
All right, cool. So concluding thoughts. Only thing that I wanted to add is there's quite a few tags in central Arizona that are rifle tags, and they are any antlered deer tag. So that means you can shoot a Coues deer with antlers or a mule deer with antlers. And in my opinion, most of those hunts, people draw those tags with the mindset that they're going to go shoot a mule deer. It seems to me that Coues deer don't really get hunted in those units all that much. If you go through the regs and look, you can see there's a whole bunch of those tags available. And personally, with my own eyes, I've seen big, sometimes giant Coues deer in those units. So take that information and do with what you will, but they're in there, and they're in multiple units that have that tag.
For sure. That's a great point to bring up. I'm glad you did. James, I want to give you a chance to let the listeners know how they can find you. I'm highly encouraged to follow James on his Instagram, which I'll give that out. It's James_Dudley 12. But why don't you give the rest of the information, how people can get a hold of you if they have any interest in either your deer hunts, your elk hunts, or whatever you got going.
Okay, so my website is jamesdudleyguidedhunts.com. Jay just said my Instagram, and those are basically the two ways to get a hold of me. My phone number is on my website, so call or text me with any questions you have about the draw or deer or elk in Arizona, and I can help you. I can point you in the right direction if you need to be, or if you're looking for a guide. I have a bunch of guides that I talk to and can help people out at any different spot in the state. I only guide in Central Arizona, and we got a lot on our plate this year already, but I can definitely point people in the right direction, and anybody wants to talk deer or elk, I can tell you where to go, what to do, how to do it, and my opinion on the best way to kill some big deer.
Speaking of big deer, is Trevor getting a little hard to deal with? Is his head barely fitting through the door after that big, beautiful velvet buck that he shot in August with his bow?
No, his head is his head's still buried in the sand because he should have shot that 130-inch deer that's on my Instagram that he didn't kill. He ended up killing a 108-inch velvet buck as a beautiful deer, yeah, with his bow. But 2 days prior to that, I was actually walking him in on a big, giant Coues deer that's on my Instagram also, some video of him, and he got to like 14 yards, and the buck was bedded. He had a clear vision of the deer, could shoot him, had vitals, ready to go, and he just, for some reason, could not get his release clipped onto his bowstring. And he was there for, I think, 9 or 10 seconds. And then finally the deer saw him and took off and disappeared forever. But
that tends to happen. The bigger they get, the more that happens.
Yeah, that was one thing he wanted me to say is make sure you're good with your equipment. Make sure you know your equipment and that you won't have any malfunctions when you get ready to shoot on your rifle or your bow or your release or anything. So that's a good lesson.
He shot a heck of a deer. So tell him I don't feel too sorry for him. I guess, Trevor, you can hear me, so I don't feel too sorry for you. But congrats on the beautiful deer, and I look forward to seeing what you guys do this year. And James, it's always great talking to you. You're a great guy. You do a phenomenal job for your clients. I appreciate you spending some time chatting with us, and encourage any of the listeners, if you need to get a hold of James, please do so. He's a great person. Happy that you're a father, and know that you'll be passing on hunting and the outdoor life to your child. That makes me smile. So, buddy, until I see you next time, God bless, and take care, okay?
All right, you too. Thanks a lot, Jay.
All right, buddy. Take care.
Bye.